Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. So what the editors are looking for in capital market research. So this is like very up to date. Yeah, so pay attention. So the two gentlemen on the right, yeah, Ankrist and Embens received the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2021. So just a few years ago, and they received the Nobel Prize for natural experiments. Remember we looked at the experimental methodology? Well, they got it for empirical studies done in natural experiments, and we'll go through some examples. So very interesting. Embens has like two children. They're like 10 and 8, a boy and a girl. And on the day that he won the Nobel Prize, they wanted to know what he got the prize for. So it's a very nice little video here of him explaining in very simple terms to his 10-year-old and 8-year-old why he got the Nobel Prize, right? So a couple of good examples. One was people are always talking about the effects of giving a guaranteed minimum income. You know, so say you gave, you know, people 25,000 a year, right? And the proponents say, well, it would encourage them to follow their dreams. They don't have to worry about paying their rent or buying food. So now they might become great painters or poets or, you know, like Elon Musk, right? Travel to the stars. Others say, no, if you give people 25,000 a year, they'll just not work, right? They'll blush. So this natural experiment that they did, there's a lottery in the US that doesn't pay the 100 million like the lotteries in Australia. It pays 25,000 a year for 20 years. So they had the treatment was the people that won the 25,000 a year, and the control was the people who didn't, matched up by, you know, age, etc. What sort of work they were doing. And it turned out that the winners just kept working. It didn't affect them. They didn't become lazy and not want to work. So they kept working. So that's an example. So all capital market studies, any empirical work you do is has a problem of endogeneity. What is causing what, right? In New York, there's a lot of policemen and a lot of crime. In Canberra, the capital of Australia, there's very few police and there's very low crime, right? So if you look at the association, what's causing what? Is the crime causing the police or the police causing crime, right? Unless you have a very clear hypothesis, you wouldn't know. In New South Wales, a state I now live in, it's fine. And in Queensland, a state I used to live in, it actually was the police causing the crime because we've had, you know, investigations into the Royal Commission. So, you know, it's not as clear cut as you think. So another example is ownership and performance. So if you have very diffuse ownership, people from all works of life, as you know, institutions, retail investors, ma and pup investors, you know, that might lead to good performance, right? But good performance, on the other hand, might attract a really diffuse ownership. Banks with really good capital reserves might perform well, but on the other hand, it could be that good performing banks can afford to have big capital reserve. Yeah. And here's a good one. Athletes might develop lactic acid as their performance deteriorates, but lactic acid, on the other hand, it's associated with declining performance, but it might be something the body's doing to continue your high performance. And everyone thought they had to stop the buildup of lactic acid because that was associated with declining performance, right? For example, you're running a lap of the track, right? You're going fine till the first 300 meters, and all of a sudden the last 100 meters, you're struggling, and there's a lot of lactic acid in your system. Well, when they studied it at a molecular level, when the science was advanced enough, they found out that the lactic acid was actually helping the athlete. Yeah, actually helping. It was associated with declining performance if you did a study on it, but it was because it was it turned out because there was diminishing performance, the body made the lactic acid. So very interesting, studying at the molecular level. So standard regression analysis compounds, what is driving what. So you've got a problem there with causality. So the statistical fix, the econometric fix is to use instrumental variables. So if you've got a potentially endogenous variable, you use an instrument. And an instrument has to have two properties. It's uncorrelated with the error, that is, it's exogenous, but it's relevant to the endogenous variable, right? And so then the IV estimator is here. The regular maximum likelihood estimator we know is the beta equals covariance y with x over variance of x. So here you replace one of the x's with z. So the IV estimator is covariance y with z over covariance x with z. And to test if you've got an endogeneity problem, you do an endogeneity test. It's called the Hausman-Wu test. So you compare the coefficients of your regression, that's your maximum likelihood estimates, with the instrumental variable estimators or the betas. And that's what the test does. How far are they different? Then you check the two properties of good instruments. One, that it's correlated with the endogenous variable, and two, that it's uncorrelated with the error. So coming up with instruments, right? So you could use exogenous variables that appear elsewhere in the system. You're probably not going to get many marks from the editor for doing that. You could use lag values of the endogenous variables. You're probably not going to get many marks from the editor for doing that. You could come up with economically relevant and intuitive instruments. Now, that's a lot harder to do than you might think. I've scoured the literature and I only come up with these 5, and I'm only sure of one. The one I'm sure of is the second one, the sex of the firstborn child. Yeah, that was used as an instrument to study the effect of family succession on firm performance. So if there was family succession from the founder to a member of the family, they're looking at what implications that had for performance. The instrument they used for family succession was the sex of the firstborn child. So let's look at the properties of an instrument. Number one, uncorrelated with the error. So do you think that something that happened by chance 40 or 50 years ago, that is, whether it's a boy or a girl, is related to the performance of the company now, 40 or 50 years on? No, that's right. But is it correlated? Now it has to be correlated with the endogenous variable. Is it correlated with family succession? Well, yes, unfortunately, and more so in Asian cultures, if the firstborn child is a boy, then it's more likely to be a family succession, right? So it's correlated with the endogenous variable, definitely uncorrelated with the error. So that's the best of all of the instruments that I've seen. And that Nielsen there, Casper Nielsen, he's a friend and colleague of mine. He also did some other very interesting work where looked at the value of directors, and to do that, he looked at exogenous shocks, which was the sudden death of directors. And he didn't kill anyone, but he collected data on the sudden death of director and looked at what impact that had on share price. And from that, he was able to find the value of a director on average. Of course, some will be more valuable than others, but the average value of a director. Okay, so let's see what's going on. And one of the things that's been studied a lot is ownership and performance, particularly inside ownership. So now, we're able to study this here at a molecular level, right? And it turns out there's an endogenous solution for each firm for their optimal amount of insider ownership, right? So for A, if insider ownership, firm A is 3%, then that's their optimal performance. For B, if the inside ownership is 7%, that's their optimal. The C, if the inside ownership is 5%, that's their frontier is maximized. The ownership performance frontier is maximized. So you can see the equilibriums here. But A is at 3%, B is at 7%, and C is at 5%. And that's the equilibrium for each firm. Now, a Senate committee requires a study to be run on ownership and performance. And two young scholars from Chicago go out and just fit a regression, not worrying about causation. And they find in this cross-section that performance is increasing until you get to 5%, then it dips, and then they had some other firms and it might go up again around 25%, right? So that's what they found. But they're not dealing with endogeneity. So what happens if the Senate committee took that seriously and passed a law saying that every firm had to have 5% inside ownership? What happens? Well, you can see at 5% ownership, you can see the frontier for A, crosses here. So their performance is going to be way down, way down the bottom. At 5%, the frontier for B crosses, just a little bit above that, and it's got to be way down. C is fine. So you can see the decrease for A in performance and the decrease for B in performance, right? So, by making everyone have 5%, you're on average causing the firms to lose performance. In contrast, if you did your IV estimation properly, you just got a straight line, because the truth is your statistics and econometrics is not going to solve your causation problem, right? It's not going to solve your endogeneity problem. What it's going to do is not lead you to the wrong conclusion. So it's not going to find anything. If it truly is endogenous, then you need to be studying it at a molecular level, right? So the two best papers written on this are papers by Dempsey, and he points out if there's endogeneity, then there's nothing you can do about it if you're using cross-sectional returns. So Coles, Lemon, and Meschke said, they agreed with that. And they said, well, look, we've got to study it at a molecular level. So they went out and assumed a theoretical model with principal agents, principal maximizing the utility subject to, and, the owners are maximizing utility subject to the principal also doing okay, looking after the best interest, and Cobb-Douglas production function. And they calibrated the model to each firm, and they were able to find the labor productivity and compare that to the insider ownership. And the insider ownership was higher where the labor productivity was highest. Things like software, networking, computers, right? And insider ownership and labor productivity was lower in things like utilities, metal mining, and so on. So how do you go about dealing with endogeneity? Well, essentially, you've got to do a natural experiment. If you're not doing an experiment in the lab, you have to do a natural experiment. And this paper in the Journal of Financial Economics is a really good roadmap. So it's a paper on debt and taxes. So there's been a lot of studies on debt and taxes, over 1,000, but this is the best one, right? So it actually goes out and gets a whole lot of exogenous shocks. That's the natural experiment. So in the US, there's state taxes as well as federal taxes. And the state taxes can be quite substantial, 7% to 12%. So they went and got all the yearbooks for each state and for taxes, and they collected all the tax increases. And there was 38 across 25 states. Remember, there's only 50 states, so it's half the states, and a couple of thousand firms. And that was split pretty evenly between the 90s and the 2000s. And there were 67 decreases in 29 states, so way more than half. 7,000 firms, again, split between the 80s and 90s and 2000s. So then they do a really good job of showing that the shocks were endogenous, right? Exogenous, right? They compare firms in different states, but just across the state lines. And they're all performing pretty well, right? The same prior to the tax change, right? So the change had nothing to do with the state of the economy in the state. Yeah. What they found was as taxes go up, firms increase the leverage, right? And we'd assume that on the basis of theory, right? Because the higher the taxes, the bigger the tax write-off you get for having debt, right? But they also found that when the taxes went down, the firms didn't decrease their leverage, right? What I'd say to that, though, I think it's very easy for a firm to increase their debt. They just issue new debt. For a firm to reduce their debt, they have to pay off the existing debt. And, most debt is held to maturity. The people who bought it want to hold to maturity. So probably if you wanted to decrease your debt, you'd have to wait till the maturity of that debt before you decide not to issue additional, the replacement debt. So anyway, outstanding paper, a deal with endogeneity, do a natural experiment around an exogenous event. Most people just have one, but these guys found over 100 of them, the tax increases, tax decreases. And debt and taxes have been studied for many years, but with no real resolution, right? Whereas this gives a very sharp and clear resolution, right? So it's probably the most sensible paper written in this area. And it gives you a really good roadmap for your own design, right? The treated firms are the ones that had the tax change, yeah? And the control are the ones that didn't have the tax changes, right? And you're able to see the effect of the tax change on their debt after the tax change. So if you want to do it in statistics, it's called difference in difference, right? So you have exogenous events, yeah? So you define a time dummy that's after the exogenous shock. You define the treatment dummy, which is tax increase or decrease. So then you run a regression with time dummy, a treatment dummy, and interaction, which is time times treatment, right? And that's where the money is, right? You're very interested in that interaction. That is, did the treated firm have a different outcome after, the time of the intervention? Yeah. So B3 is what you want to look at. And you also have controls. So that interaction is the effect of tax change on post-tax change in debt holdings. So in doing this, you've got to consider, Hyder and Lindqvist wanted to make sure the effect was exogenous. So what they do now is they do something called parallel trends. That is, before the change, before the treatment, were the firms you're studying on parallel trends? Doesn't mean they were doing the same, but whatever difference between them was, it was not changing over time. And then you look at, once treatment, how do they change? One might go up and the other might stay the same. Yeah. So they want to have parallel trends prior to. The other thing that editors want you to look at is take account of multiple time periods. So Hyder and Lindqvist, it was the 90s and 2000s. So a lot could change. A lot of extraneous events that we talked about with, the actual experiments could occur in 2 decades. Things could change. So what they want you to do is something called staggered diff and dip, which means you get the coefficients for each period, and then you somehow average them, right? So you either average them equally or according to the number of events, or that is, the number of tax changes here in this example. So that's something important to look for. So, and the editors for a while were happy with that, right? They were happy with you doing a natural experiment. But now they have started to refer to the natural experiments condescendingly, looking down on, as reduced form estimation. That is, you're not running a model, you're just running outcomes against explanatory variables. You're not saying how the explanatory variables affect the outcome. So they call it reduced form. Yeah. So now, in addition to showing that X causes Y, doing the diff and diff. They want you to fit a theoretical model, right? So that's called structural estimation, yeah? So they want you now to, once you've shown causation, they want you to fit a theoretical model so they can ask what if questions, yeah? The outcome's a function of these explanatory variables and these parameters. What if we change the parameters, yeah? And they can do social experiments. So a good example of this is Briggs. And again, it was another lottery they were able to study. So this lottery they were looking at, it was a European country. You either got 150K lump sum or monthly installments. They were interested in the 150 lump sum, 150,000. So did that result in people, being more likely to invest in the stock market, right? So they did a different diff, and yes, they were. They were 12% more likely to invest in the stock market if they got this windfall gain. And so that's great, right? But that's not enough, right? So that showed causation, but then the editors wanted more. So they said, well, look, we want you to fit a theoretical model. So in economics, there's a model called the life cycle theory, right? So as young people, they find it very hard to borrow, and do anything. And in fact, there's a famous paper by Constantinides called Junior Can't Borrow. And it's sort of saying that the marginal investor, the person that can make investments, buy a house and everything, is a middle-aged person in their 40s. Yeah? So junior can't borrow. So the economics has got a very clear idea of the life cycle and what you can do in different stages of your life cycle. So here, the structural estimation was fitting a life cycle model. So then they were able to look at whether the people who won the lottery invest in the stock market, but they're able to do it as a function of the parameters of their model. Yeah. So they were able to see how much they invest in the stock market, where they invest in the stock market was driven by each of the parameters. And they were able to do policy experiments. What happens to the outcome if we change the parameters? So the editors are looking not only for the different diff, which they call reduced form, but then they want you to fit a theoretical model. And I'll give you some examples of the theoretical models that have been used. Yeah. So we know the Coles, Lemon, and Maschke is a good example of sort of studying at the molecular level. They fitted the principal agent production function. With the production function, you can get the labor sensitivity, the capital sensitivity. Pan, and Z did a production function. Whitted, Wu, and Z did a structural industrial organization, or an IO, demand system. Whitted is the editor of the Journal of Financial Economics, and she goes around proselytizing that you have to do the reduced form and the structural estimation if you want to get into the top journal. Yeah. And we just looked at Briggs, which did the life cycle model. Yeah. So that's some examples. Now, a lot of people were spending money on environmental. So there's a model, a general equilibrium model, known as an environmental stochastic dynamic general equilibrium model that models consumers, producers, government, right? So you can introduce things like a carbon tax, yeah? And then you can play around with whether that revenue from the carbon tax or emissions trading scheme is recycled into the economy, right, as R&D incentives and or tax breaks. So great lectures here from Tony Whitted. They're hours long. They're 3 hours long. So there's more than you ever wanted to know about reduced form and structural estimation. It goes through a whole lot of papers in great detail. Yeah. So what are the editors looking for, right? Well, it's best not to do two-stage least squares, right? It's best to do GMM. Editors think that two-stage least squares is so last century, right? So it's best not to do that. But if you do GMM, it's just the same anyway, except you estimate everything at the same time. You don't do two steps, you just do one step, but you get the same estimates. They'd be happy if you use intuitive, economically motivated instrument, but that's really hard to do. They'd really like a natural experiment where you do diff and diff. But in addition to that, which they call reduced form, they want to see a structural estimation where after you've done the natural experiment, you now fit a theoretical model so they can ask what if questions, right? So capital market research has got very demanding. Where can you find these natural experiments? Well, whenever there's an exogenous shock, right? So, you see a lot of papers from China, appearing in the top journals, right? That's because when China wants to do a policy, it first does a few pilot zones. So it wants to do an emissions trading scheme. It rolls that out in 5 provinces. Yeah. So you can look at the treatment firms, which are in those 5 provinces. You can look at the control, which are other provinces that are matched to those 5. And you can do a diff and diff, right? You can do your natural experiment. And then for your structural estimation, you could use that environmental stochastic dynamic general equilibrium model, right, that I talked about. Now, that's just software, right? That's just software. So, you might look around in Vietnam. What sort of measures has the government done which, come across as an exogenous shock, but affects some parts of Vietnam, but not others, right? Because remember, you need a treatment and you need a control. So most people thought before Haider and Lindqvist did their paper that there wasn't a treatment and control, that they just looked at federal taxes, right? But Haider and Lindqvist looked, outside the box and said, well, the state taxes as well. So let's find when, some states change and other states don't. And then we've got treatment and control. So you've probably got to do some lateral thinking to come up with these natural experiments. In failing that, you can do a systematic literature review, as Shalini told you, or you can do a qualitative study, you can do an experiment, you can do a survey. You can't do an empirical study, a capital market study. There's lots of other ways to do it. So it's a good idea to have these research methodologies, in your tool kit as a researcher. So that's the whole idea of what we're doing with these workshops, and the whole idea of what Knowledge Bridge is about. Okay, we stopped that one. So now we're going to go to, and I've got to tell you what page. Get this down. What the editors are looking for. That's a Word doc. Okay, getting published. And I'll tell you what page that's on. Page 351. I worry about knocking the microphone over. Oh, you might have to stay here too, because I've got to get a share screen. And I've got to get the display right. Okay, sharing the screen. Sure, that's right.
It's number space 351.
351. 51, yeah.
The option is the different one, what?
Should be the same.
Yeah, okay.
They'll tell us soon enough. Right now, you've got to get the display here right. Come back. Come back. I'm going to need you. Okay, so I want to share. I've just got to find the right thing. Hang on. We've got to affect the display.
Fine.
Snipping to what the editors are looking for. Yeah.
Yes, this one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, no, getting published. Getting published. Then I'll come back to what the editors look for. So now when I do this,
We should.
yeah, it's shared now, but now the display we need to fix.
Do you want slideshow right?
See this thing? We just wanted to have this. Don't want that. This is what the Zoom people are seeing. They're seeing the two. We don't want them to see what's coming up because that's confusing. They just want to see this.
Yeah.
We need to fix the display.
Em trên Zoom là có đang hay làm thành hay là chỉ slideshow thôi? Cái cột. À,
There we go.
có cái này đúng không? Là thôi, cái cột, các slide. À vậy hả? Happy. Yeah, I think it's the option when we share. Get to screen too. So which means that they only see the presentation.
I think they're seeing what I see. You only see one? You sure?
They just see this.
You
not
sure?
this.
Okay,
Yes,
okay.
I just asked the Zoom.
Okay, okay,
Chỉ thấy một màn hình thôi đúng không? Okay, it's okay now.
okay. Although it doesn't seem to be progressing from there. We don't want the recording to stop. We want the recording to start.
Hi, Tom. I just refreshed the recording so
Thank you.
that, we got the new section.
Thank you. Okay, so we're talking about how do researchers come up with ideas, right? And it's something that's not talked about a lot, right? So people tell you that you should be looking for gaps in the literature, right? That sounds sort of very mechanical, right? Doesn't sound like a lot of fun. They tell you should be advancing the field, especially if you're very promising. We want you to be the next best thing to advance the field. So should you be developing, focused on developing new ideas, or should you be focusing on, developing existing ideas or coming up with new ideas? So they're the big questions. Well, firstly, Einstein, he was asked whether he kept the notebook to write down all of his ideas. And he said, well, I don't understand the question because it's so seldom that he has an idea, right? So ideas are very precious and rare, right? Real ideas are very precious and rare. So then there's a very interesting story about Richard Feynman. And Richard Feynman graduated as a PhD student, and he was considered to be a prodigy, like a genius. He was immediately conscripted into the Manhattan Project, which is where they developed the atomic bomb, right? And everyone thought there that he was a great intellect. He then, after the war, got a job at Cornell University. And he was supposed to be moving the field of physics onto the next big thing. And he was thinking about what could be the next big thing? What could be the next big, and only focusing on that. But he wasn't getting anywhere. Nothing was coming. And in fact, the only, enjoyment he got was teaching the very smart students at Cornell because they'd ask very challenging and interesting questions. And, his dean was starting to think, we recruited this guy who's supposed to be the next great, the next Einstein, but it's not working out. And even he was struggling, right? So, because he wasn't coming up with any ideas. So one day he was at lunch in the Cornell, cafeteria, and a student started, twirling a plate on his finger. And, Feynman looked at this and in the plate in the middle, there was the Cornell logo, but that was spinning seemingly at a different rate than the outside of the plane, of the plate. So Feynman got very excited by that and started writing things down and drawing diagrams and equations. And he went to show it to his dean, and his dean must have looked at him and thought, what the hell? You know, some guy's been here for years and hasn't produced anything, and now he's up really excited about a spinning plate. So see what he wrote about it here. In the bottom, the diagrams and the whole business with the spinning plates is what I got the Nobel Prize for. Right? So he just worked on that because he was interested in it, right? And of course, why was he interested in it? It's not like he lives in a vacuum. He would have been aware of the literature. Remember, he was a prodigy. He knew all the literature, and he obviously was interested in that for a reason, right? It must have resonated back in the background that he had, right? So he was out there trying to advance the field, but it wasn't happening. But then he saw something that he got very interested in, and that led to his Nobel Prize and the big leap forward in physics. Very interesting fellow. There's a book he wrote, Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, which talks all about him. He was a very, very funny man. But you get a unique look into how people come up with ideas, right? And it's not what you expect. It's not, sitting down looking for a gap in the literature. It's working on something you really like. But it's probably going to be a gap in the literature in advance because you're aware of what's gone before you. So, this stuff you enjoy. Follow your natural curiosity, yeah? And, I don't even think about where am I going to get this published. I honestly don't think about it, right? I just try to do the best work I can and get it published in the best journal for that sort of work, yeah? So you work on things you love, that means it's fun to get up and go to work, yeah? It doesn't matter if you're the first one working in this area or the 1,000th. Think of the Hyder Lindqvist, right? They must have had fun collecting all those state taxes, thinking no one's done this before. It's a lot of work going through all these yearbooks for each state, but no one's done this before. We might really find something, or we might not, right? So they didn't know whether they'd get it published or not, but they, went through all that work of collecting data and they found something. Here's the big thing. And I'm really serious about that. Be prepared to make a fool of yourself. There's no good being shy. And a lot of people here overcome their shyness and spoke up well today, right? But I try things, but I make a fool of myself all the time, right? I'm really good at it. I'm quite practiced at it. And people don't laugh at you. People feel for you. Oh, well, at least you have a go. You had a crack, right? So be prepared. Unless you're making a fool of yourself, unless you're making mistakes, you're not really trying. So we know the real academics know that you've got to fail lots of times before you succeed, right? So you're not really making a fool of yourself. You were trying and it didn't work. And that's a lot better than people who aren't trying and it doesn't work. So a research culture is really important, right? There's a lot involved in doing research, coming up with the data, doing the interviews, doing the survey, writing the paper, polishing workshop. People don't understand. They write the paper, but they're only 10% there. The other 90% is really polishing this paper and workshopping the paper, right? That's a lot of work involved. If you just do the research and write the paper and send it off to John, you're not going to get published. You've got to polish, right? And that involves giving to your colleagues to read, giving a brown bag if you can't get in the seminar series, going to conferences, getting input. So finally, when you've polished it, you've got to target the journals. And if you're lucky enough to get a revise and resubmit, you've got to know how to respond to the referees, right? And you also need help with getting grants. Lots of deans want their academics to have attracted grants. You need help with networking. So the idea is if you went to a conference with Duke or with me, I'd introduce you around to all the top people that are at the conference, right? And you need help supervising and helping other people. So if we can create a sharing, caring, supportive environment, right? That's really the optimum, right? When you go there, you're talking about your research and everyone wants to help you, but they don't want to be on your paper. They don't want anything for it, right? Because you've got to help them with their paper, their ideas. So it's something you've got to think about all the time. As I drive to work, I think about, well, how can I make myself, more available? I don't want people to be scared to have my door open and everything, but I don't want people to be shy and not come in, right? So how can I assure them that I don't want anything? I don't want to be on their paper. I don't want, to steal their PhD shit. So you really got to think about it. And, if you're really generous and unselfish, that helps. But that comes back to you too. So it doesn't matter whether you're, the PhD student or the chaired professor, right? Everyone can make a difference, right? Some of the, Duke is a towering giant, right, in academia, but she's a lecturer at RMIT, right? A lot of you have got higher titles than her, but she wants to make a difference, to make a caring, sharing, supportive environment, right? So she's like a champion. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be the chaired professor that does it. So on my computer screen, there's a sign that says it's the research stupid. So not only my own research, but helping everyone else with their research. So you need to be working on it all the time. So things as simple as, taking the time to read your colleagues' papers and giving them comments. If there's a workshop on in your university, read the paper before the seminar and have some, comments prepared for them. And, it's great to talk to others about what you did in the weekend, but it's also good to talk about your research, right? And make that up, something you do regularly. And of course, celebrate successes. Oh, wow, you got a new publication. That's fantastic. So review process, responding to referees. Well, when you decide on a journal, you've got to submit the paper. Well, it's best to conform to the style requirements. So my journal has a funny way of doing the abstract, right? You've got to do the abstract under headings. It's an emerald journal. It's the Journal of Accounting Literature. Others just like a paragraph for the abstract, but mine's got a specific way of doing the abstract. So if I see a paper, submit it to my journal, and the first thing I look at is the abstract, and it's not in the form of the journal, I go, what the hell? They're not showing me any respect, not respecting the process, right? So it's normally a double-blind process. You don't know who the referee is, and the referee doesn't know who you are. However, if you've sufficiently polished your paper, you've probably gone around a few conferences and presented it. So if the referee wanted to find out who the authors were, they could just Google the title, and it might come up at the conference site that so and so presented the paper. Yeah, so in that case, it's only a single blind. Right? So the referee might know, but you take it from me, you never know who the referee is, right? You might think you know who the referee is, but in the cases where I know the referee and people are guessing, they're always wrong, and tragically wrong. Okay, so the language is very severe, right? For example, here's a referee report I got. Your paper stinks, you stink, your university stinks, and your family stinks. That was the referee report. So be prepared to be told that you stink, your work stinks, your university stinks, and your family stinks. Terrible language. But remember, in other professions, the language is tough too. For example, in the theatre, when you're about to go on and do your part, your colleagues, the fellow actors, say, break a leg, right? That's terrible. They're wishing that you break a leg. That's because there's a thought that if they say good luck, that you'll have a very bad performance, right? So they say break a leg. That's what they mean. Anyway, the language is severe, right? So you just got to steel yourself for that. Okay, so then you go and send it for a first round review, right? And the results you can get: accept, revise, or reject, right? When I say accept, is a very low probability. Let me give you an example. Of 2,500 papers submitted to the Journal of Finance in a regular year, have a guess how many get accepted on the first round? 0. And about 300 make it to the second round. Yeah. Of those in the second round, have a guess how many of those get accepted. They've done a revise and resubmit and sent it in. So now it's the second round. Have a guess how many get number out of 1 to 2,500. 1.
2.
1. Right. And it's only when you get to the third and fourth round that the papers start being accepted. Yeah. So that it's extreme as that. So when I say that accept is a very low probability, that sort of means 0 on the first round, yeah, and just about 0 on the second round at these very top journals, the FT50. Better, you're hardly ever going to get something accepted on the first round. So don't expect that. If you get a revise and resubmit, but you look at it and it's really, scathing of your paper, the comments are really terrible, insulting, you would think, oh, I'm just going to hide this and not going to show it to anyone. But if you showed it to me, I'd say, fantastic, fantastic. They love your paper. They just want you to fix these few things, right? So a revise and resubmit is a very rare thing, right? So if you get one, it doesn't matter what it says. We can handle this. We can respond, right? I can help you respond. Reject, unfortunately, is the most likely, right? And sometimes you even get rejected within 24 hours. The editor just rejects it, right? So you've got to steel yourself, right? So revise and resubmit is a great result. Normally going to have to do not just a second round review, a third round review, all of which takes time. Yeah, takes time. They make a lot of, if you're doing a survey, well, it's really hard to go out and change the questions with another 10,000 mail-outs, right? If you're doing an experiment, it's very hard to go and get participants to run it again if they make, crucial comments. And the same for qualitative. You have to go to all that trouble to get, new participants and ask them the revised questions. So if you get a revise and resubmit, then your odds of getting the paper published, go up astronomically, right? So what you've got to do is you've got to prepare a document. Yeah, it can be a very substantial document where you list every comment from the reviewers and the editor, and you have a response to every comment, right? So first of all, do not do this the day you get your review, right? Wait a few days and get some input, right? So you've got to be polite, right? Even though the referee is an idiot and doesn't understand how great you is, be polite and thank them for their comment, right? And you say, even if you've said what they're complaining about is what you said, you say, oh, I apologize. I wasn't clear enough in what I said, and what I meant was, and then spell it out, right? So so for each point, you're right. Whether you agree or disagree, and you don't have to agree with everything, but you give the reasons, and then you outline what you've changed and where you've changed it in the paper. But you shouldn't, do things. The referee might want you to do things which you don't believe in, right? So you should disagree and say, look, I disagree because of this. You want me to put this variable in, but it's non-stationary, and that would, foul up all the econometrics, and you give some simulations or something to show it. Yeah. So René Stolz was a long-term editor of the Journal of Financial Economics, and he's given some tips on responding to referees' comments. The very first thing he has is you've received your referee report. The referee is an idiot. What do I do? And so that's the very first point. And he continues in that vein. It's quite humorous, right? Because everyone thinks the referee is an idiot, right? But by the time they finish answering, they go, oh, well, maybe I wasn't clear enough. I didn't really understand what I was doing. So it can be quite a substantial document. A colleague of mine, the one that predicts returns with 100,000 variables that he discarded and reported 5, he once did a response to the referee He was trying to predict returns for the whole world, and it was a 100-page response, a 100-page response on a 25-page paper. So the response can be quite a substantial document. You write down every point the referees have said and the editors, and you give a response and talk about where you changed it. But you should be able to, your chances of getting accepted are really go up if you're lucky enough to get a revised and resubmit. Remember, that's the big results you want. You're never going to get it accepted on the first round, but if you can get a revise and resubmit, that is fantastic. Doesn't matter what they say. So what are the lessons? You need to be thick-skinned because the language is truly awful, right? And the probability of rejection is high, but we all face it, right? We all face. I could wallpaper my house with the rejection letters I received, right? Many times over. But it's because I got so many rejections that I've got so many publications, right? You've got to try. And of course, you're going to fail, right? But that's you trying. So the more you try, the more you fail, but also the more you succeed. So you need to be stubborn, right? You need to be persistent. You stick at it, right? Because, you get rejected, right? And it could take years, right? One paper I got published took me 8 years from when I started to when I got it accepted, right? And that's not all the journal's fault. The journals get back to you very quickly, but it can take a long while to do the revisions. Yeah. And you need to be organized, right? For example, if it's a capital market study, if a year or two has gone by, well, you're going to have to update the data. So you're going to have to remember where you got all the data from. You're going to have to redo the analysis. You're going to have to redo the writing. So unless you know where you got the data from and, have all that documented, you'd be starting from scratch again. So you've got to be organized for this. So if you're having trouble getting published, just rest assured that you're not the only one. All of these guys are Nobel Prize winners. And Gans and Shepard went out and talked to them. And they couldn't get away. These Nobel Prize winners wanted to talk to them all day about the terrible time they had getting published, right? They have all these stories about their papers getting rejected, right? So they, the Gans and Shepard found it hard not to gain access to these Nobel Prize winners, but to get away from them because they wanted to talk and talk and talk about that. So they get lots of rejected papers. That's why they become Nobel Prize winners. They just kept working. So Black and Scholes sent their famous theoretical paper on, the theoretical value of a call option to Journal of Political Economy. And the editor, this is long before desk rejections become commonplace, the editor of Journal of Political Economy just sent it back. And it was only after Black and Scholes got their empirical paper published, which showed that the option pricing model, correctly valued 99% of the options, that Farmer and Miller, two very famous professors at the University of Chicago, twisted the arm of the editor of the Journal of Political Economy to publish the paper. Sharp, another Nobel Prize winner, came up with the capital asset pricing model, sent it to the Journal of Finance, but the editor sent it back and said that the assumptions that all investors had the same information is so preposterous that it makes all of the results meaningless. So he was just sitting down crushed by this, right? And it was only when there was a change in the editor, that the paper was ended up being published in the Journal of Finance. Lucas, the famous paper, Lucas the Nobel Prize winner, Neutrality of Money paper, sent it to one journal and said, if there's a point to the paper, it's hidden by the exposition, and they rejected it. And finally, after 2 or 3, he got accepted at a journal. Akerlof tried like 6 different journals, right? So essentially his paper is about how, it's very hard to have markets, right? Because, he gave an example of selling cars. So sellers know whether the car is good or not, but the buyers don't, right? So there's a difference in information. So, because the buyers don't know, they value You know, they're only prepared to pay the price of the bad cars, the lemons. And because they're only prepared to pay the price of the lemon, the people who are selling the good cars don't go to the market, right? And so then the only people selling would be the ones with lemons. So the market breaks down, right? So then you need something for markets to exist. And this is a very important point for markets. You need to have people like us who are liquidity traders. Every pay, 20% of my salary goes into my retirement, right? And that's whether the market's going up or going down, right? So all of the people putting their money away for their retirement stock exchange, they're the liquidity traders. And without us, they'd only be informed in the markets, and they don't want to trade with informed. So it's a very, very important paper, but it kept getting rejected. It was too general to be true. Well, actually, it's a fantastic model. It is, applies to everything. It was too trivial. It was too readable. And finally, the Quarterly Journal of Economics, which was a new journal back then, accepted it, but now it's got like 100,000 citations. And the Quarterly Journal of Economics must have made a few good calls, because now it's the highest impact factor of all economics journals, because it accepted a few papers like this. So we're still not finished. I think we can keep the recording on, because this topic is going to be related to coming up with research ideas and getting published. We're going to look at what the editors are looking for. Is that it? Oh, I did it. Okay. Is Zoom okay? This is just Word, so I'm just going to leave it like this. Yeah. So this should be okay. Okay. So what are the editors looking for in general? We talked about what they're looking for qualitative, for surveys, experiments, and capital markets. But now we're going through, just everything about what they're looking for, right? For all of the different methodologies. So they're looking for original, citable research. Now, you've got to take into account what the editors need, right? The editors need the papers that they accept to be widely cited, right? So the more the papers they accept are cited, the higher the impact factor for the journal, and the more they get credit for doing a great job, right? So that's what they're worried about. So with that in mind, when you send a paper, you should have a lot of references, right? Particularly to the journal you're sending it to and their sister journals, right, in the same discipline, because that's very important for the editors. They look at that and go, this person knows what I'm looking for, right? So that's very important. You don't just send a paper which has got hardly any references, right? And the references have got to be current, this year or last year, yeah? So 2005, your references should be 2025 or 2024. So a bunch of recent references, because they're the ones that count the most towards their impact factor. So if you're going fishing, you need to know how fish behave, right? When's the best time? So if you're sending a paper to a journal, you've got to know what editors are looking for, right? And they're not going to tell you, they can't tell you, right? But they want citations recent to their own journal and their sister journals. And then they really like that, yeah? So on the margin, that's got to get you accepted. So, obviously, if the paper needs to make a contribution, right? But there's lots of ways you can make a contribution. So, it needs to make a contribution so you're cited. So it's important to have a great research question, a good research question. So you've got to be clear about what your research question is. And the methodology is going to be strong. And, you come up with the idea, you've collected your data, you've run your analysis, yeah, and you've written it up. Remember, you're only 10% there, right? So then you've got to really, really polish the paper, right? So this is really important. A lot of people just think, okay, I've written the paper, I'll send it off, but that doesn't work. Yeah, and here's the thing about the references, and they won't tell you that because they're not allowed to. So all of these different methodologies, you know, what's the state of what the editor's looking for? Good example. So here's if you have this on soft copy, here's a Dropbox link to my national PhD course. And I'd love to see you doing that course, July 14th through 17th. It's online, it doesn't cost anything. So I think you'll learn a lot and you get a lot of resources, not just me talking, but there's all videos of past sessions and all of the reading and exercises, etc. So you've got to engage in the research conversation, and that's part of getting, you know, citing the literature. I don't know what's going on here. Yeah. So, you know, in my field in accounting, they do a lot of principal agent research. Yeah. So you can't just cite Jensen and Meckling in 1976 and then pretend you're the next paper, right, in the sequence, right? There's a whole lot of researchers that have worked in this area, and some quite recently. So you have to cite them, right? If you don't, you're not engaging in the research conversation. And there's a more practical point. Who do you think the editor's got to send your paper to? Are they going to send it to Jensen and Meckling? No, they're long gone from the academic scene. They're going to send it to the people that are working in principal agent right now. And if you haven't cited them, and they're going to think their work is incredibly important, and you haven't cited them, what chance do you think you have of getting published? No chance. No chance, right? So there's a practice, you know, first of all, you know, to be, you know, true to academic standards, you should acknowledge the work of others. And second, there's a practical reason. They're the ones that are going to be refereeing your paper. So you better have referred to them and refer to them accurately. Okay. So for qualitative research, right? What are the editors looking for? So a couple of papers there by me and my co-authors. What's your theoretical perspective, right? Where do you fall on that? You know, there's one absolute truth to everyone sees a different reality. And in fact, there are different realities, right? So, you know, obviously, you know, people see different things. Today, I've seen one reality, but I bet if we sat down and compared notes, it's completely different to what you've seen today, what you've experienced and what you've seen. You know, what I've seen and what experienced is going to be completely different to you. And the person next to you is going to have a different experience. So you can't just ask a bunch of questions, right? Every interview questions should be tied to your research question. Yeah. Don't necessarily have an hypothesis in qualitative, right? You're trying to get the rich background behind why people are doing things. And triangulation is really important. We saw how well that works, right? When you work in groups, you're incredibly focused, right? All the groups come up with the same three things for why people want to be teachers. When we did groups versus individual, the individuals weren't far off, but they had a huge variance, right? There was like a shotgun versus a sniper's bullet, right? So the groups were like a sniper's bullet, and whereas the individuals were like someone firing a shotgun, and it goes everywhere. So triangulation, right? It's not just data triangulation, it's not just interviews, documents, and observations. It's participant triangulation, right? If you do a study on financial disasters and you only talk to investors, you're only getting 1/3 of the story, right? Because the financial planners have a story to tell and the regulators have a story to tell. You can't just paint them as the baddies, right? You need to talk to them because they have a story to tell and you might be amazed, right? what things look like from their perspective. So then when you've done the interview and you have the transcript, right, and you go through it and you're looking for themes, right? So you would come up with initial themes and then combine them to get intermediate and then final themes. But then you have another researcher would do the same, right? And then you compare. And soon you'll have AI doing it as well, right? So even if you're not another researcher, you can compare what you've done with what AI did. But that's important. But it's important then to go back and look at it again, right? So you can't just take an average. You've got to iterate until you get some sort of consensus. So it's a good idea to explicitly tie your conclusions, your final themes to the sources. So was it the interview, the focus group? We haven't really talked about focus groups. They're difficult. They're more difficult than interviews. You should always videotape focus groups, right? And it's best to have a professional coordinator doing it. And you can be in a one-sided mirror, watching. But, group dynamics are very interesting, right? A strong person can take the focus group completely off the rails, right? So that's why you wouldn't just do one focus group. You do a number of focus groups and you'd have it videotaped so you could see the dynamics in the room. So focus groups are a little harder than interviews. So we haven't really talked about it. But then you've got your observations, your documents, bank tells you a very convincing story, but then you go and look at the documents relating to the bank and you find it's been fined for, 45 million money laundering offences, right? And fined $1 billion, right? And it's not the only one. All the banks have been subject to ripping off their customers, right? There's a Royal Commission on it. And then you've got your memos. So you tie it to one of those sources. And maybe the ones that's tied to most sources might be the strongest result. So, and Farah, Gephardt, they talk about the best practice on how to write up. Remember the Goldilocks rule. If you're giving quotes from the participant to back up your themes, you've got to be wary of giving too many quotes, right? In which case you'd have 100 pages, which is mainly quotes, or too little. You'd have 20 pages where there's barely a quote. So that the editor and the reader have sort of got to be brought along in the story with you, so they can almost guess what the final themes are. So for survey research, what are the editors looking for? Well, again, you've got to have a specific hypothesis, specific hypothesis. So definitely for survey, you have a hypothesis or hypotheses that you're testing. For qualitative, it could just be an exploratory study, right? And qualitative, along with the systematic lit review, might help you to come up with hypotheses to test in a survey. So then you've got to make sure the questions are tied to the hypothesis. So remember the 80-20 rule? You measure 4 times and cut once, because it's really expensive. You're sending it out to 10,000 people to get 1,000 respondents. So getting the questions right, don't, you give it to your colleagues, right? Do they know what you mean? You know what you mean, but not everyone's going to know what you mean, right? So your colleagues, they go, yeah, that's good. So then do a pilot study of, 30 to 50 people and then just see whether, from the responses, whether they understand what you're doing. The use of scales is important, right? Do you just use, the 5 for an individual question? Do you just have strongly agree to strongly disagree? Or do you do 7? Do you include, not applicable, because that's sometimes important. What about a abstract concept, right? Like confidence. Can you just ask how confident? I'm very confident to not very confident. In a 5-point scale, can you ask that? It doesn't work. You can ask it, but you're not going to get any credit for that, right? The scales, right, which are a series of questions that have been designed by other researchers, used many, many times, been verified scientifically, and they're available. And I showed you, where the website where you can find access to the library scale. So abstract concepts, multiple questions, yeah, and which you aggregate to then find. So EQ, IQ, financial literacy, risk aversion, climate worry, climate stress, all these sorts of things. And the response bias, right? So, if Vietnam Academy sends to their own people, only 30% are going to respond, right? That's what you should expect. If to get more than that, that's fantastic. Vietnam Academy sends it out to the general population, they're probably only going to get 10%. Right? But they think they're going to get more. Only in Russia will you get 100%. 100% of the people vote for Putin. So only in Russia will you get 100%, but you won't here. So then common method variance. Is the way that you're doing the survey affecting the result, right? And we talked about online. I'm your biggest, champion. You asked me to do the survey for you, I'm going to do it. But if it's online, I'm just going to look down the answers till I find the first one that seems relevant, and I'm going to go click on that one, right? If you're on the telephone with me, I'm going to probably give you one of the last ones, right? I'm going to get sick of saying, what were the first three again? Yeah, and you're going to get sick of it. So the only ones I'm going to remember are the second last and the last. And I'm going to go with one of those, right? So the way you ask the questions, so you should mix up the order of the questions and you should mix up the order of the responses, because this is a known common method variance, right? So that's very important. Don't collect your independent variables and your output variables from the same survey. Collect them from different sources. So that's really important. These are all things you do ex ante. Just as a practical common sense, don't ask people for their characteristics at the beginning of the survey, because once you ask them their age or their weight, they might just say, no, I'm not doing this. So have those things towards the end, right? Right at the end. Otherwise, that way you capture the responses to the questions related to your hypothesis. And then these are all ex ante measures to do. And then ex post, you can test to see whether there's any common method variance in the results, right? And then we pointed you to a YouTube video that went through that. And then there's these good papers here for primers and surveys. Don Leclerc for asking questions, and remember, and common method variance, and remember the lady from Yale that wrote about doing experiments in economics, and I think she published that in very recently, 2023. So, well worth looking at. Literature reviews, I've been told not to say anything about literature reviews because we've had a real expert take you through that, and you're doing a little bit more on it tomorrow. Okay? What are the editors looking for with experiments? Again, you've got to have a clear hypothesis. What's your exogenous shock? What's your outcome? Yeah. So you've got to have treatment and control. What about using students as subjects? Well, students are very homogeneous across the world. So, and they can understand complicated instructions and abstract claims. That's, applicable to the real world. Are you playing with very small stakes? Well, we saw that, they did a survey in Australia, where they were getting $50, but at that time, the Australian dollar was so strong that when they were doing the same thing in Indonesia, that $50 was equal to a month's pay, and it didn't affect the outcomes. So anchoring, right, is incredibly important, and order effects, right? And, anchoring is sort of going with the default, and we talked about that can affect your entire retirement income. The American people go with the default. They're anchored at the government bond portfolio, earn 2 to 4%. The Australian default is the full market, and they get 8 to 10%. So makes a big difference, and everyone seems to go with the default. And the order effects, we know that's very important. You know, if you had 3 hours sleep, then 10, you might get different outcomes than if you had 10 hours sleep and then 3. And so then for the capital market studies, do not do 2-stage least squares. I mean, it's no different to GMM, but it's the editors don't want to see it, right? They want to see you doing GMM, right? So that's what they want to see. You end up, in most cases, with the same coefficients as 2-stage least squares. It's just that you do it all in one step. So you can call, IV GMM, just call it that. They do want to, causality is a big issue. So they want the natural experiment using different diff. That's referred to as reduced form. So once you've shown the causation with the natural experiment, then they want you to fit a structural model. That is a theoretical model, right? Where you can ask what if questions. What if these parameters changed? What effect would that have on the output? And sample selection for our response bias, that was important, right? We said you could do a Heckman's sample correction, and we gave you a video. Same thing here. In capital market studies, you can do sample selection as well. Again, using Heckman, Nobel Prize winner, his sample selection, sample bias, sample selection bias correction. And, use robust standard errors. Just don't go with the maximum likelihood standard errors. Go with robust standard errors, which normally means GMM standard errors, right? So they're adjusted for heteroscedasticity and autocorrelation. I did very well to say that big word, the heteroscedasticity one, at this time of the afternoon. So we're nearly finished. We're going to need some questions because we've got to wait for Duke to come back, because she has the books and she wants to take photos of me presenting each of you with the book. So I'm sure she'll be here very soon.
I'm on the taxi.
She's here. She's right here. She's in the taxi.
I'm on the taxi. I will be back soon.
She's been monitoring us.
So you just get everyone to register if they want to register. Yeah.
Registering. I'm not sure what she said, but if you want to register, you can register. Please ask a question.
Yeah, I will be back soon in 10 minutes.
10 minutes, she says. Yeah, so we need more questions. This is good.
Yeah, maybe just do Q&A for 10 minutes, Tom, please.
Yeah, I'm going to mute Duke now.
If
You're
anyone
interfering with our questions. Okay, let's have the question.
Experiment online. Try to know more about the condition, pro and harm. Is it suitable to use experiment rather for my thesis or not? So if you can elaborate more about in one case.
Oh, it's suitable for most things, right? And it's the best way to show causation. And you look at all the published papers on experiments in the FT50 papers, journals, they're on all sorts of topics. So what's your topic area?
In retail, digital retail environment.
So digital retail environment.
Topics green, the green digital nugget. Nugget.
Digital, someone help me.
Usually that you use some of the small like UX, UI to change a little bit on the design on the internet.
Yeah, so that could be the intervention, right? So what sort of digital specification they have in front of them, and does that affect, for example, their buying behavior?
Right.
Yeah. So you could easily design an experiment around that, and you'd find lots of examples where they have different conditions. That it would be, especially in the marketing and psychology areas, right? So, and I've got to tell you, the marketing people know so much about behavioral biases, right? They They can push the buttons to get you to buy things that you never even knew existed and never wanted, right? So, but they're amazing, like, and particularly in getting men, middle-aged men to buy, really dodgy financial products, right? So they're just amazing. They show a person in a beautiful suit on a mountaintop and all the things that a middle-aged man wants to be, and they're driving this car, or they're wearing the suit, or they're using this financial trading system, right? So the marketers know more about behavioral biases than anyone, right? Because they've been doing it for years. They've been getting people to buy stuff they didn't need for like decades. So you'll find lots and lots of experimental designs in marketing and psychology that will be very useful for you. But yours will be different because it's new and better, and it's looking at digital interventions and different, not just digital versus analog, but different ways to do the digital intervention. So that would be your exogenous shock. I think that would be ideal for an experiment. And the reason the experiment is you can really see the effect of the intervention. If you just looked at an empirical study where you collect the data, there's so many compounding effects, you might not be able to establish causality. So what's better than a natural experiment? Well, a natural experiment, yeah. Yeah, more time. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid to make a fool of yourself. I love making a fool of myself. That means I'm trying. When you wake up of a morning, some people go, oh, I hope I have the perfect day. I hope I don't stub my toe on the way out. I think to myself, if I only make 99 mistakes today, I'm going to be really happy, right? So if I get through the end of the day and I've only made 95 big mistakes, I go, wow, what a great day, right? And as a result of that, I'm a very happy person. But the person who wants, a lot of people want to have the perfect day, and they're always unhappy because there's no such thing, right? You always got to stub your toe or make a fool of yourself, right? So and that's a very important thing, behavioral. It's like framing, isn't it? I frame it a certain way, right? And it really works for me. So don't be afraid to make a fool of yourself, is what I'm trying to say. You're not going to make a fool of yourself because the only stupid question is the one you don't ask. That was a really good day, but gee, I wish I'd asked this question. That relates to my own research. Yeah. And I'm not going to say that your question sucks, you suck, your university sucks, and your family sucks. I'm going to leave that for the referee to say, because they will do it better than me. I could do all of this in interpretive dance, if you like. So I could do a 60-second interpretive dance, which will bring home what the editor's looking for.
Okay, because we will have some analytic program at the end of this afternoon session. Just on behalf of the organizing committee, I just want to say that thank you to Professor Miss for today's session on the qualitative and also the quantitative method for all of us here. And also, I would like to invite the representative from our Aviation Academy store. Just have the flowers and token of appreciation to you. Today, I just want to invite Mr. Adam from International Institute and also Mr. Wang, Deputy Dean of the Department of Aviation Operation. Yeah.
I'm taking this seriously. I'm taking this very seriously.
Yeah. So this we want to send our sincere gratitude to you to thank you for you delivered the experience, the sharing experience for us. Okay.
That's all right. Leave it okay. That's all right.
Yeah. Okay.
We can fix it. We can put it in one of these cups. So Thank you.
Can I have applause for?
No, it's gone. So thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure.
Okay.
Let's put Canary on the back.
Sorry, but we have one more from the Faculty of Foreign Language. We have some flowers to give to Professor Smith and also Professor Charlie. Could you please on the stage, Angela? Yeah, I think that we have protocol inside for 2 days and one more for you tomorrow. Okay, this from Faculty of Foreign Language. Yeah, okay.
Cô mấy cái đèn vỡ bạn cô đâu ra đấy để di chuyển ra cho mình kiểu cái xoay cái này đúng rồi.
Wonderful.
Yeah, okay, I think we can have a group photo, big group photo of our own class. Yeah, yeah, whole class. Okay. We see familiar face from yesterday and today's session.
And isn't that great to solve all of Vietnam problems for the country that you're solved?
Đứng hai năm rồi.
Đâu mà để người dân đứng sau này.
We're looking more of a curve. A high curve. A high curve. A high curve. We should be arriving anytime soon, the door open. How's it going with it? So they've weighed it up. 30 books would weigh it off. Okay, that guy is going to get you signed books. Who's got a hold on this one? He, you know, my man, you know.
Thank you.
Thank you, we're not done yet.
We're done today and sent some people.
So we need to have Kiberi here in the background. So how do we do that? Kiberi or Vietnam Academy, we need to have that as a background here. So remember, we've still got quite a few people online. So do the online people have any questions?
Could we have your work file about what the editors record?
Yeah, so you have here, you have the Dropbox for the whole national PhD course. Let me find that for you. Let me find that for you. So you have this on soft copy. You have this on, they sent it to you on soft copy. Yep. Okay, so here we go. Yep. Yep, it's good. So if you click on
Send us the file in the
it's a
screen.
oh yeah, you've got all that soft copy. Oh, okay. Didn't have that one? That wasn't part of the thing?
So in this book,
Okay. Here it is. Right here, starts on page 338. What I just went through. Yeah, page 338. you've got that, and you should have a link to the whole national PhD course as well. Let me just find out where that is.
Only
Hi, Tom. Hi, Tom.
Hey, yeah,
Do you hear me?
yep.
Yeah, I have a question for you. Am I
So,
không tới 7 năm.
Duke,
Yes,
can you help? Someone's asking a question on Zoom.
sure. Còn có mấy cuốn các bạn nhé. Thầy sẽ ký và thầy sẽ tặng chụp hình. Sách có bản quyền 1 triệu một cuốn. Còn có mấy cuốn.
I've got the link here.
Đi lấy mà.
Anyway, I'll send you the link. Might be good for you to do that course in July 14th to 17th. Yeah.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, this I signed for someone earlier.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so
No
you
one
keep that separate.
I have a question for Tom.
So you.
What's question?
Em chị Đức ơi,
contact
em
to-
có một câu hỏi
to
về
the
research method.
National PhD Research Methodology course on from July from 14th to 17th. So it might be good for you to do it. And there you'll get the Dropbox with all videos and readings and a lot more material.
You mean the one in Korea?
Yeah.
Yeah. She should have.
Yeah.
She in the group already, so.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
but yeah, so you should send a link to that.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, sure, yeah.
Dropbox, hả?
Yeah, it's a Dropbox link.
Oh, you want the
I'll
Dropbox?
send it to you.
This one is exactly from the Dropbox.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah, but there's more stuff. There's more videos and readings.
The video is only YouTube.
No, in my Dropbox.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, for the course, there's all videos of me doing it.
Okay, yeah, I send later.
You'll
Yeah.
send it. I'll send it to you, you pass it
Yeah,
on.
right. Thank you.
So what was the question? Someone's asked me a question?
No one. I think. Em.
I'm here. Dạ, em Mai
Yes.
đây chị. Em hỏi nha.
Em hỏi đi.
Tom, I
Camera
have a question.
không biết mặt mũi.
Dạ, em Ngọc Mai đây. My question is that if I do both survey and interview in my research and the results
Okay,
of
you're asking about interviews?
do you hear me clearly?
Yeah, I can now.
Okay, I will repeat my question.
Yep.
If I do both research and interview in my research, and the results from the survey and the interview is the contrast. So what is your advice in that situation?
So here's my best advice, right? You first do the literature review, and you get, what the experts think is going on. Then you do the interviews, the qualitative, and you see what real people are worried about. And then in designing the survey and coming up with your hypotheses and questions, you take what ask questions about what the literature has said, but also questions about what the qualitative has said. And so remember your interview is only with 30, 50 or 70 people, but your survey is with 1,000, right? So you might get results that are different from what the literature thought or your qualitative said, but that makes it even more interesting. If the results aren't consistent with what you found in the literature review or the interviews, then you've got some new findings, right? So then you might iterate back to doing another qualitative study and then another survey. So rather than being a problem that you get inconsistent results in the survey to the interviews, it actually makes it more interesting.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Got it. Okay. Thank you, you.
See
Thank
you
you, V.
tomorrow.
Thank you, V.
Mai.
Bye.
Yes. See you tomorrow, Mai.
Yeah, see
Thank you,
you.
Mai. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone. See you tomorrow.
Are we stopping the recording?
Yes, you can now. All right, bye. I think I'm ending, yeah.
Han?
Han, do you have any question or you okay? I think you're okay.
Okay.
All right.
Yes, I'm
bye-bye.
okay.
Yep. Bye bye.
thank
See you
you.
tomorrow at 8
Bye
o'clock.
bye.
Yeah, you can end. No, you end, okay. Right.
Cancel.
Just end.